It is 6:30, 6:31. So I think that we'll start and let other participants come in as they come. Shirley, you get to start us off, please.
Your vote, my vote, and the vote of every eligible voter in the state of Georgia must be counted through easy access, fairness, and equity. Good evening, everyone. I'm Shirley Barber James, publisher of the Savannah Tribune, established in 1875 as one of the oldest African-American weekly newspapers in the country. We are pleased this evening to partner with The Current, and especially to partner with Margaret Coker, its editor-in-chief. For the next 2 evenings, we are presenting for you online voter education. I would like to say that last year, during the 2020 cycle, we at the Tribune had the opportunity to partner with several nonpartisan organizations as we also presented voter education series. And we had the privilege of having representation from the Secretary of State's office each time, and also from the Chatham County Board of Registrars. So this is something that we are glad to continue, but especially this year in partnership with The Current. For those of you in our audience, we welcome your full engagement. Our aim is to enhance your knowledge with information about the new voting law in Georgia so that you will know how to access the voting process. The experts are with us this evening. They will share what you need to know so that you can exercise your right to vote and let your voice be heard. Knowledge and understanding empower voters. So please listen, ask questions, then share your knowledge, and by all means, vote, and encourage at least 4 or 5 or more other persons in your circle to vote. Thank you, and Margaret, take it over.
Thank you, Ms. Shirley. Hello, everyone. I'm Margaret Coker, and I'm the editor-in-chief of The Current. We are a 1-year-old news organization launched in 2020 to help revive public service journalism across coastal Georgia, which is why we are calling tonight a voter education event for coastal Georgia. We have representatives from the Secretary of State's office. Mr. Walter Jones is here. We have the leaders of the Glynn County Board of Elections as well to talk about local elections in Brunswick on November 2nd. Colin McRae, the new chairman of the Chatham County Board of Registrars, will be talking about voting in Chatham County. We are pleased to have Ashlee Bruner from the ACLU of Georgia joining us to talk about voting rights and the laws in Georgia, and Nina Altschiller, who is the president of the League of Women Voters in Coastal Georgia, is also here. We're going to start with our panelists giving brief presentations, and then we're going to open the event up for questions. For you in the audience, thanks for coming. And please, thanks for any forbearance that we need to ask of you as we get through our technical difficulties. We ask that for your questions, you will pop those questions, type them into the Q&A box that you see below you. And then once our panelists are done, I will moderate those questions, and we hopefully will find answers for all of you before the end of our hour. So with that quick introduction, we're going to allow Walter Jones from the Secretary of State's office to start us off.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you everybody for paying attention to elections. Every year, the Georgia General Assembly votes on what they call housekeeping bills for every state agency. These are bills that modify existing state law to reflect changes that have happened since the legislature met a year ago. In the area of elections, there were 2 sources of the primary lessons learned. Last year, we had a record turnout, and we had record use of absentee ballots. The second area was the demographic changes that have made Georgia now a battleground state. That's important because what it means is that in partisan elections in the future, we're going to see a platoon of out-of-state political operatives coming here with plenty of cash, looking to test and to take advantage of any weakness they find in the election law to use it as a competitive advantage for their campaigns. So with those two big things in mind, the legislature enacted the Georgia Election Integrity Act of 2021. So let's look at some of the main things in this new law. Most people vote in person. So you'll be glad to know that the law now limits how long you have to stand in line to 1 hour. It also reinforces your protection while you're standing in line so that nobody can badger you, nobody can try to change your mind, nobody can mess with you. Maybe you like to vote early. You'll be glad to know that there is more opportunity for that. This law adds another day of early voting. It adds Sundays into the law. It was sort of a gray area before. And it has uniform times, at least 8 hours of early voting every day across the state now. It addressed absentee voting. There were two areas that are responsible for most of the ballots that are not counted: signature match and late arrival of ballots. Regarding signature match, county officials no longer have to try to figure out your signature as a way to identify you as a voter who submitted this ballot. Now you will use a number from a photo ID, just the way you would present a photo ID if you voted in person. Regarding the late ballots, we found that most of the ballots that were turned in late were requested at the last minute. So we took a look at what other states do, and we imposed, I say we, the legislature imposed a deadline. Ours is a little bit later than many of the states. But now with this deadline, you can be assured that if you request it by then, which is 11 days before the election, you have every reason to expect that your ballot will arrive in time for you to vote it and turn it around and get it back to the county so that they can count it. Also, this law prevents third-party groups from flooding your mailbox with absentee ballot request forms that you didn't ask for and that you may have gotten in the past after you'd already even voted. That's not going to be possible under the new law. It also put in the law for the first time drop boxes. You may remember that Georgia experimented with drop boxes during the emergency last year. It was an emergency rule because of the pandemic. Well, not every county used them. So the legislature is now requiring every county to have a drop box. Another aspect of the law is that it shortens the runoff period. Now, if you're a fan of negative political advertising, you may not be happy about this, but believe me, the rest of us are, because it cuts in half the number of times that we have to see these negative TV commercials in the news and on our favorite program. It also affects something, the area of vote counting, a couple of different ways. First, the votes counting has to continue nonstop until it's completed. No overnight breaks. It also has to be completed by 5 p.m. on the Wednesday after the election. On 10 o'clock on election day, we'll now get a number of the total votes cast, absentee and in person, even if we don't know who they were cast for. So at least we know how many will be outstanding. If there are any discrepancies, those have to be cleared up within 30 days. This legislation also make counties that have had chronic problems getting their act together, now they'll be accountable to the state election board. And the bottom line is this legislation continues a policy that Georgia has had for years of making voting easy. You may recall Georgia was the first state that extended the vote to 18-year-olds. It has done other things that are leaders for other states, such as we have no excuse absentee voting. We have 3 weeks of early voting, and we have automatic registration for when you get your driver's license. That has meant that Georgia has among the highest percentage of eligible adults who are registered to vote. After this new law was enacted and signed into law by the governor, a nonpartisan group in Washington, the Center for Election Innovation and Research, ranked all of the states based on their ease of voting. And you'll be glad to know that your state came out on top. Thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for that presentation. We are next going to hear from the Glynn County Board of Elections. We have the chairwoman there, Patricia Featherstone, and her colleague, Christina Redden, who are going to tell us about local elections in Brunswick and Glynn County.
We just have a short little talk. We got a couple of slides. You know, this whole evening is about all of Georgia voter education. So we just had a couple of slides that are Brunswick specific. The first is that this is a city of Brunswick election and we don't have a county election this time. A few of the counties are having county elections, but unfortunately, if you don't live in the city of Brunswick, you are not going to be able to vote in this election in Glynn County. You've got the next slide. Yeah. So we're only having one early voting location open. We normally have 3 for countywide elections, but we only have 1 location inside the city limits, and that's going to be here at our office. We'll be having the Saturday voting that the whole state will now have on the 16th and the 23rd. Our hours will be from 8 to 5. Come next year, we might look at extending those hours, but right now we're planning on 8 to 5. And our drop box is actually inside our building. Like it's right here in our lobby, so you can't miss it. If you'll go to the next slide. So the big news is we have a new polling precinct. And we're really happy about this polling precinct. It is just, it's a beautiful location. We think our voters are gonna love it. Huge parking area. Just really ease of access, great ADA facilities, just like we're so excited about it, but we've been pushing it so everybody knows that we have a new polling precinct. And mainly it's just, if you're wondering if that's your polling precinct, the best thing is to just get in touch with us. So if you just go to the next slide. This is how you get in touch with us. We produce every year a voter guide. Go ahead and flip it over to camera. You can get to the, can you see us? Are you seeing us right now? Okay. So we produce this voter guide every year. And one of the things we did this year is the inside of it is a Q&A about SB 202, about what the voter can expect to be different for them. And we're really proud of it. We've gotten a lot of feedback on it. So anybody who is in Glynn County, I would really recommend just stopping by or asking us to mail you one. And anybody outside of Glynn County, if you would like to see it, just to kind of get a feel for it, we'd also share that with you too. So that's just what we've got going on here. But you know,
our website is very informative too. Yeah, very good.
We're a little proud of our information.
Christina, can you tell our audience, besides your Board of Election office, where else can they find their voting guides? Do you have it at libraries or anywhere else?
Well, right now we just have them at our office, but so many of the civic groups in town take big stacks of them and just send them out. So probably both of the political parties, I know the NAACP has them, several of the neighborhood associations have them. Whenever I drop them off at the library, they're gone really fast. So I just haven't stocked them up because the library was closed for COVID. But yeah, no, they're very easy to get. And we also have a digital copy online, so people can also see them. Our website has just about anything anybody ever asked us for, we have on our website.
It's very good.
So, you know,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Colin McRae, who is the chairman of the Chatham County Board of Registrars, is up next to tell us about elections in Chatham County in November.
Well, thank you, Margaret, for having me. Thank you, Shirley James, for putting this on. I'm going to try to keep my talk, like my friends from down in Glynn County, centered on the local aspects of our election. I'm going to try to avoid, whenever I can, a counterpoint to what our friends from the Secretary of State informed us about the purpose behind the Election Integrity Act. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I will say that a lot of the changes from SB 202, Senate Bill 202, that Mr. Jones referenced, were solutions in search of a problem, because many of the problems that these are intended to ameliorate just we don't see from the boots on the ground level. I think that so much of this was the product of suspicion about corruption or suspicion about problems in the election process that a number of audits, recounts, et cetera, have shown not to have been the case. But we have a new set of laws that we are, charged with implementing, and our very well-trained staff is doing their best to adapt, and that's great. Real quick about our board, we're the Board of Registrars as opposed to a Board of Elections. We're one of the very few counties, I think there's only one other county in Georgia that has separate boards of registrars and elections. So my office and my board deals with registration, obviously, but also absentee ballots and early voting. So I'll sort of focus on those three things. Of course, we have our November election coming up, November 2nd. Here in Chatham County, we do have a countywide ballot measure. We have an eSPLOS ballot measure. So we have the full complement of countywide voters that we are hoping to see come to the polls. We, are realistic, and we don't expect it to be anywhere close to the turnout that we had for either the November 2020 or the January 2021 elections. But we, we hear a lot of people in the community talk about how important eSPLOS is, on both sides of the debate. And so we expect there to be a significant turnout. There won't be as much of the political TV ads as you saw certainly not for the senatorial campaign. But I expect that this will become a pretty high profile vote in the next few weeks. So that's the only countywide measure. Governor Kemp recently called for a special election for the 165th House district race after the unfortunate passing of Mickey Stevens. We have 4 candidates who have jumped in the race. You've probably seen a lot of signs out on the roads, maybe some ads in local publications. So I think that one's going to ramp up pretty quick. So there'll be good turnout for that. Then we have some municipalities that have their municipal, council or commission races, and those are always very passionate, those races, because you can have a race come down to just a few votes, and so literally every vote counts in the eyes of those candidates in those small municipality races. And I say small because the 2 largest municipalities in Chatham, which are Savannah and Pooler, are not having municipal votes this go round, but the votes in places like Tybee can get, very heated in the sense of being very competitive, not heated, use the wrong word, competitive. So we expect there to be a lot of activity about that. In the past, we've seen some significant voter challenges come from those municipal races, and we expect that those might be coming down the pipe pretty soon. All right, let me just talk real quick about absentee ballots, absentee voting. As Mr. Jones stated, the absentee balloting is still in place. There has been a significant curtailing of the amount of time during which an absentee ballot can be requested. And thankfully, all of our candidates and ballot measures are all, locked in at this point on our ballot. But it's not unheard of for there to be changes to a ballot in the last few days. So thankfully, that won't be an issue. The fact that the time during which absentee balloting takes place, or at least the time during which you can request a ballot, has been shortened so significantly. We're hoping that that does not lead to a significant impact on the ability of our Chatham voters to exercise their right to vote. The important date to remember for the purpose of absentee balloting is that a request for a ballot, now a request only, a request has to be submitted to us no later than October 22nd. And the difficulty there is that the request has to be on an official form. It has to be on a state approved form. We have those at our office. They're available on our website where they can be printed off from a PDF. But for those voters who don't have the ability to vote, excuse me, to print something at home, you have to request an application. And then that official application has to be mailed. And then that takes a few days. And if you don't give yourself enough time, you may miss the boat because you don't realize how shortened the period might be for you to actually request the absentee ballot. So that state form, is available on our website and can be obtained locally in our office. But if you don't have the ability to do either of those, print it out or pick one up, you can always request one from us. Let's see, the ballot itself, the envelope, the yellow envelope that we've all seen, it'll look a little different this year. There is an added flap. I wish I brought one with me, but the new envelope has a flap that is used to protect that sensitive personal information that Mr. Jones was talking about, where you can write your driver's license number. There we go, thank you. Yeah, good. I got Vanna White here showing off the new envelope. So that flap that we just saw is what will protect that personal information, your driver's license number that you write on there in lieu of making a photocopy. So to address the kind of bugaboo that people have heard about this photocopy of your ID, that's really not the case. If you have a Georgia driver's license, you don't need to make a photocopy of your ID. You put your number there on the outside of that envelope, and then you fold that flap over to protect your information from being, seen by others. So something came out in the AJC recently that a, significant majority, I can't remember the exact number, 70, 80% of Georgia voters have an ID that can be used. And Walter, you might know the precise number on that, but the number is pretty significant. So what I'm trying to encourage is anybody who is concerned about voting by absentee because they fear that they may have to make a photocopy of their Georgia driver's license, that's not the case. You can just write your number on the outside of that envelope. And even if you don't have a driver's license, if you have an official state issued ID that has that number can be used as well. That does eliminate the signature verification process, although you will still sign the back of it. It seems a little counterintuitive that you now have a signature requirement where it's not even going to be verified, but the legislature in their infinite wisdom saw fit to eliminate that signature verification in lieu of having the ID requirement now. So you can still drop off your absentee ballot at a drop-off box, but the ability to do so has also been significantly curtailed. Why, I can't really tell you, but all absentee drop-off boxes now have to be located indoors, inside an area where an early vote is going on. So don't think that you can just drive up, take 5 steps out of your car and put it into an absentee drop-off box. That's no longer allowed. You're gonna have to actually go into where the early voting is taking place and drop it off in person into the box inside. That eliminates the needs for a security camera, but in my opinion, will probably, it will limit the number of people who are willing to use that absentee drop-off box. The other big change, of course, was we don't get to use as many drop-off boxes as our voters are requesting. And thanks to the very generous efforts of Nina and her group, the League of Women Voters, we had 10 absentee drop-off boxes placed all strategically around the county in each county commission district to ensure that we had a widespread use of those. Now we get 3, and they'll all be at locations that are already being used for early voting. So those 3 drop-off box locations are our main office, mosquito control, Islands Library. So those are the 3 places where you can drop off a drop-off box. And Nina, you may have heard from your fellow League of Women Voter member, Kat Durso, that we got approval from the county to donate the extra boxes that you guys underwrote for us to other counties that may need them and don't have the funds to buy one. The deadline for submission of the absentee ballot is still Election Day, 7 p.m. So it is not a postmark requirement. So hopefully voters have learned by now that it is not to be postmarked by that date. It has to be actually physically received by our office by the end of the day on Election Day. Early voting, last thing I'll talk about. We actually have a countywide election, unlike our friends down in Glynn. So we do have a full complement of satellite early voting locations during that 3-week period. We have the main office on Eisenhower, far and away the most popular. Then we'll have Mosquito Control, the Civic Center, Islands Library, Southwest Library. So we'll have 5 different early voting locations for that 3-week period between Monday, October 12 and Friday, October 29th. We will have 2 Saturday voting days from 9 to 5 p.m. at our main office on Eisenhower. Those are October 16 and October 23rd, again, 9 to 5. We will have 1 Sunday voting day. That's also at the main office. That will be October 24. We typically do that from 12 noon to 5. We got the go ahead from the Secretary of State's office to have it between 12 and 5, that those are approved hours. Anything that I may have rushed through in terms of hours, locations, et cetera, is available on our website in accordance with the accommodations. We have it in readable format on our front page of our website. I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover. Of course, we'll answer any questions that anybody might have. Thanks.
Thank you, Colin. And again, the website is for the Chatham County Board of Registrars. In Chatham County, there's a Board of Registrars as well as a Board of Elections.
That's right.
We are going to go to Ashlee next. Ashlee Bruner is from the ACLU of Georgia. Ashlee, you've got the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ashlee Bruner. I serve as policy advocate at the ACLU of Georgia, and I help to run our voting access project. So very pleased to be here with you all. ACLU of Georgia and our coalition partners, some other voting rights organizations, worked very hard to simplify voting procedures that resulted in 5 million Georgians casting a ballot in the general election in November 2020. But Senate Bill 202 made some changes to voting procedures that are going to require voters to be alert to the new rules. So as Mr. Jones and Mr. McRae already stated some overview of Senate Bill 202, I won't go through and repeat everything that they said, but there are some top line parts of it that I want to reiterate for voter education. So for absentee by mail, there's been a change in the request period. So before Senate Bill 202, a voter could request an absentee ballot 180 days before an election and up to 4 days before an election. Now, after Senate Bill 202, you can request a ballot 78 days before an election up until 11 days before an election. So Senate Bill 202 reduces the period for mailing ballots also by over 40%. Before you would get your ballot mailed 49 days before an election, and now it's 29 days before an election. I'll also share really briefly about the ID requirement. Yes, you do have to provide either a driver's license or state ID number with your absentee application, but it's also important to note that there are over 155,000 Georgians who do not have a driver's license or state ID number, who are a part of the voting age population. So I think that's important to note. If you don't have a driver's license or state ID number, you are still permitted to request an absentee ballot. You'll just have to include the last 4 digits of your social security number and your date of birth on that flap that gets privatized on the absentee ballot application. October 11th is the first day that absentee ballots are going to be mailed by your municipalities. That's the earliest day that the counties are going to actually send out those absentee ballots. So if you've requested, I believe August 16th was the first day that you could request an absentee ballot. If you requested it back in August and you're like, where the heck is my ballot? What's going on? October 11th is the first day that the municipalities will actually mail them out. Returning your absentee ballot, either by mail or drop box, like Mr. McRae mentioned, but the drop boxes aren't nearly as useful as they were before. They can only be established inside buildings where advanced voting takes place, and they're only accessible during hours of advanced voting at that location and only on advanced voting days. So that's important to remember. Again, October 22nd, these are really important dates, so I apologize for saying them over again, but it's important. October 22nd is the deadline to request your absentee ballot, but to return your absentee ballot, that deadline is actually on election day. It must be returned, which means received by the election office by 7 p.m. on election day. Election day, also, provisional voting has been changed by Senate Bill 202. The bill actually disenfranchises most eligible voters on election day who cast provisional ballots inside their county, but outside their one assigned polling location. So it's really important that you check the My Voter page run by the Secretary of State's office before you head out to cast your ballot in person. There are a lot of changes being made that are out of anyone's control regarding polling location changes. So mvp.sos.ga.gov is the website you'll visit. That's the My Voter page, and it'll tell you, you put in your address and I believe just your name, excuse me, and maybe your date of birth. And it'll show you based on your address where your assigned polling location is. So some other helpful resources. If you have any issues while you're attempting to vote, either in person or via absentee ballot, you can contact the Voter Protection Hotline at 866-OUR-VOTE, and also the ACLU of Georgia at voting@acluga.org. I'm going to drop all of these in the chat as well. I'm just not a great multitasker, so I can't do it while I'm talking. And then I want to talk really briefly. I'm the policy advocate. I'm not an attorney, full disclosure, but I do want to talk briefly, top line, high level, about our lawsuit. So AME v. Kemp, filed by the ACLU of Georgia, the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and then the law firms of WilmerHale and Davis Wright Tremaine came together for a lawsuit after Senate Bill 202 was passed. We're challenging the ban on mobile voting, challenging new ID requirements for absentee ballots that may put Georgians at risk of identity theft. We're challenging the restrictions on the secure drop boxes, the provisional ballot disqualification, and I think perhaps most cruelly, the ban on line warming, which is the practice of giving food and water to voters waiting in line. That has been banned after Senate Bill 202. So these provisions, the lawsuit argues, violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and also infringe on Georgians' rights under the 1st, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments. So I'm happy to answer any questions. That was my overview, and I'm going to drop those links that I talked about in the chat as well.
Thank you, Ashlee. Great information. We are going to have our last presenter, Nina Altschiller from the League of Women Voters, and then we're going to get to all the questions piling up in the Q&A. Keep typing there, audience, and we'll get to as many as we can. Nina.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I am Nina Altschiller. I'm president of the largest League of Women Voter chapter in Georgia. We primarily serve Chatham, Bryan, and Effingham counties, but our goal is to reach from Savannah to Brunswick and everywhere else along the coast. So we would love that Glynn County information to upload into Vote 411, which is our everything you need to know about voting website. that lets you like my voter page, but we give where candidates stand on the issues and where you vote and voting hours and all of that's very specific information to where you live. We'd love to include the Glynn County information. So I will get to you offline so that we can get that information from you to include it. The League has been around for 100 years. Our mandate is voter education and voter engagement. We are nonpartisan because we believe that voting is nonpartisan, except it seems that voting has become very partisan, which is unfortunate. We don't care how you vote, we just want you to vote. And we want people to register, to learn about who's running and vote in every election, from school board to president to ballot initiatives. We know that when people vote, their voices are heard. And we accomplish this by working with all of the people you see on this panel, the Black Voters Matter, the NAACP, the Junior League, the United Way. We'll work with anybody if we can get people to the polls. We hold voter registration drives, and we particularly focus on high school and colleges. A lot of students don't realize that they're not registered to vote. They also don't understand that if they're at school, away at school, that they need to get an absentee ballot if they can't go home to vote in person, and they need to do that by a specific time. There's all kinds of information that students don't have or maybe don't pay attention to when they're in class. We do candidate forums. We did one last night on Tybee, and we're going to do another on October 14th for our special election for Savannah's District 165. This is an opportunity for the public to ask questions and to hear in their own voices what the candidates have to say about where they stand on the issues. As Colin mentioned, we raised a lot of money to buy drop boxes for Chatham County, and they were put to good use, and they were all over the county. It made it easy for voters to be able to walk and drop their absentee ballot into a ballot box. There are only 3 now, and we are very happy to hear that the rest are going to be donated to other counties. It's unfortunate that they won't be accessible 24 hours a day as they were in the past. Not everybody can come when early voting is happening, which is the point of absentee ballot drop boxes in the first place. As I said, we work with the state and National League to upload voter information, and so you can go to vote411.com to check all your information. In person, we do a lot of things like hang door hangers and send postcards and put up huge ground level billboards to tell people where their early voting sites are, what the hours are, and to remind people to vote. Voting is critical. And if you're interested, you can help us by volunteering. You could Google the League of Women Voters of Coastal Georgia. We'll pop right up and you click on that and join us. We could use your help. And thanks a lot.
Quick question, Nina, do you have to be a woman to join the League of Women Voters?
You absolutely do not need to be a woman. And if you're a student, you can join free. And we're trying to get partners to join, and then we have partner organizations have partner memberships. So we're making it very easy for people to join.
Thank you. Slightly tongue-in-cheek, but not really. So we have a lot of questions to get through, and maybe with an eye on the clock here, I'm going to pose 3 together, and I'm going to let the experts who need to answer them. We'll get to another group of 3, and then hopefully another group of 3 before we're out of time. First, either to Ashlee or the Secretary of State's office, the voter hotline that you referenced, Ashlee, in your comments, who runs that? Is it a group of attorneys from the ACLU, or is that something that is run by the state? There's lots of other questions about the enforcement of the new state election law. And I'm not sure if this is better answered by the Secretary of State's office or by our local election officials. What happens if the county doesn't finish their count by 5 o'clock the Wednesday after voting day? What happens to individual votes who are that aren't yet tabulated? And what happens if you wait more than an hour in line to vote. According to the new state law, that's illegal, but who enforces that? And what protections are there in place on election day to help voters actually be able to take advantage of what's supposed to be a new benefit for them?
So the 866-hour voter protection hotline is actually run, I believe, by Fair Count. It is a nonpartisan organization, but it's not run by the ACLU of Georgia or the state. And I'll pass to the experts to answer those other questions.
The state has a hotline as well. That is 877-725-9797. I'm trying to remember all these questions. One of them was, what if I'm standing in line and it takes longer than an hour to vote? The voters will continue to have the opportunity to vote and their votes will be counted, but the county then will have to, after the election, they'll have to make some changes to that precinct. Either they'll have to change the number of voters assigned to vote there, bring in more equipment, but the point is that they're not allowed to continue to have a precinct that doesn't have adequate resources for the voters assigned there. I think the another question was, what happens to the county if they don't get all the votes counted in time? The state election board oversees the county's administration of elections. Counties run the elections. And it is a frequent thing that counties have instances where they are accused of not following one or other of the election rules. They have the opportunity to be heard before the state election board. If the state board feels that there was some violation committed, then they can get a formal hearing before the administrative law judge. And so those consequences may be something on the level of a fine, but from the voter standpoint, you still get to vote. And the bottom line is everybody is focused on making sure that voters can vote easily, quickly, and painlessly. And I don't remember the other questions. I'm sorry.
No, those were the bulk of them. May I pass the same questions to our county election officials? Do you have the resources necessary in order to fulfill the requirements of the new law in terms of ballot counting by the new deadlines? Well, and what sort of enforcement mechanisms do you have, if any, to help voters who are standing in line, whether they have to stand in line for more than an hour, whether they're being harassed in line, or any other assistance you can provide voters while they're waiting to cast their ballots?
Well, we have a lot of precincts. In proportion to our size, we have a lot of precincts. So already we have slimmed down so that we're not prone to having a lot of, a long line. We are actually kind of known for not having long lines, and we normally finish tabulating rather early, but that's because we start early. The main thing is with these rules is in a lot of the, like the 5 p.m. rule and the hour-long wait it's not so much to negatively impact the voter, but to make sure that we are running a tight ship, to make sure if November comes and somebody has been waiting long for an hour and a half, you better believe that the next time that won't have happened and we will have had to answer for those actions at the, at the state election board. So we have the resources, but it's also because we throw everything we have at it. We always throw everything we have at it. you know, one of the new rules is that it used to be that it was one machine per 250 voters, but we could also kind of adjust that based on how much absentee and early voting turnout there had been. But now it's just one machine for 250 voters, no matter how many people are early voting, which is just another way that they're going to have less lines. And we're already planning to buy more machines.
Yeah, we're gonna have more machines.
We normally deploy every machine we have for every election. So, you know, it was more of a, if we go into it not trying to withhold resources, if we just go ahead and use all of our resources, then we haven't had line waiting problems and tabulating problems. But I understand that there's certainly going to be counties out there that don't have maybe the budget that can do that, or they don't have the manpower, or Lord knows we're in the middle of a pandemic or having some kind of outbreak, something like that happens. So we have been fortunate, but yeah, that's just, it's mainly a, let's throw everything we have at it. So, yeah.
And I'll talk from, at least from the Chatham County Board of Registrars perspective. You know, we don't have anything to do with election day voting, although we do have to split up the machines that are available to our county between those to be used for early voting versus those to be used on election day. And, you know, it's an art, not a science, trying to predict how many people are going to early vote and how many at a particular location and how many on a particular day. So you can try your hardest to staff up and, you know, put as many machines into an early voting location in hopes that you don't get long lines of people. But inevitably there will be instances when that just cannot be complied with because of either, you know, you have, you've estimated wrong, or, you know, there's just not the resources to have enough machines. One thing that the county has done to address one, you know, kind of particularly sensitive area of the county was in West Chatham, where 4 years ago we saw a number of very long lines, and just within the last 6 months we've gone through the process of splitting a precinct there that was way too big and has now actually been split into 3 new precincts in order to get it down closer to what the average size number of voters for that precinct, those 3 precincts are. So hopefully that will ameliorate the problems out there in West Chatham, at least to some extent. We always try to get information, you know, out in front of the public in the lead up to election day to try to encourage as many people as possible to vote early and vote by absentee. You know, early voting had its problems during the presidential election because, you know, not picking on our friends at the Secretary of State, but there were some technical glitches not of our doing that, you know, had a significant hand in those long lines that we experienced in the first few days of early voting. So what I can envision is that, you know, there is a voter who, you know, as is his or her right, you know, reports us for not having complied with the 1 hour requirement. And then next thing you know, we get an investigation from the Secretary of State, and we have this, you know, sword of Damocles hanging over our head of a takeover by the state election board. So it's disturbing to me to hear the added kind of scrutiny that this will lead to, especially with, you know, this ability of the state to take over the local elections process. So I trust that with this particular election, where turnout won't be as heavy as it was for the presidential election, that hopefully we'll be able to handle it just fine. But, you know, Katie bar the door when it comes to that gubernatorial election next year. And so hopefully either we get some more resources for some more machines, or we get some, you know, understanding from the voters, and people space themselves out between early voting, absentee voting, and election day.
Thank you. We have more questions. Ashlee mentioned the number of Georgians who do not have a state ID or a driver's license. Could our panelists address what other sorts of IDs can be used for an absentee ballot? Social security numbers, including date of birth, Is a utility bill with a current address, is that okay under the new law or not? And another question, a process of having to verify the voter's license or ID number seems very time consuming. How is that going to impact the need for a speedy count and counts to be finished by the day after the election day itself? Panelists.
Colin, you want to go? Or so a little bit of what was said was slightly misleading. So you can put a social security number on your ballot envelope when you are returning it, but that doesn't get it on the application. And just putting a social security number on an application will not be able to process. It does have to be either a state ID, driver's license number, or one of these IDs that you can do. But there are so many IDs that a photocopy can be, given. And like in our office, it doesn't have to be a photocopy. Everybody's in the age of texting and emailing, and we have a digital line that you can submit your ID with that, so that you don't have to actually. I tell people my printer hasn't printed in like 3 years. So if it was me, I would have to take a picture of it and email it to somebody. But it can be any kind of government issued ID. We had a guy one time vote with a bus pass. It can be a utility bill. It can be a government document. If say you're in a nursing home and you have your Medicaid bill, you can use that. So there's a lot of options out there for people who may not be able to print it. There's a lot of options that you might just have sitting on your kitchen table that are things that you can use to send to us. And the state is going to have a pilot program. Walter, you can agree that they're going to have a pilot program on how people can do their IDs next year. But for right now, we're figuring out these things. So far, with the absentees that we have received, we haven't had to reject a single one for an ID issue. So yeah, we're doing very, very well. Now, when the ballot comes back in, you can put the last four of the social. It's just that I just want to be very clear that the last four of the social can't be on an application. It can only be on the ballot when it's coming back in, because it seems to be a confusion point. So yeah.
Yeah, let me just add to that. 98% of registered voters in Georgia have a driver's license number or a state ID number already associated with their voter registration. If you have that number, that's the number you use. It's not an option. It's not like you can choose to use a different number. As we just heard, if you don't have one, you can use one of these alternate forms of identification to request the absentee ballot. We don't want you mailing that type of personal information with your ballot, because the way ballots are verified is the outside of the envelope is reviewed to verify it. And now it will be with this number. If you've used one of those alternate forms of identification, then the last four digits of your Social Security number will be the number that the counties use to verify it. Otherwise, it'll be your driver's license number for most of us. And I don't believe it'll add any time to the verification process, because it's essentially an automated process now.
Yeah, I agree with Walter that I don't think that the verification of these ID will add significant amounts of time. Arguably, it'll be quicker, because signature verification, if there's even, our office used to use kind of a three-tiered graduated system. And if there was one that was kind of touch and go, you might have three different staff members devoting 5 or 10 minutes each to it. And you're talking about potentially 30 minutes of staff time that, a verification of a driver's license number against a state maintained database could, I don't know, could take less than a minute. So.
Thanks, y'all. I'm going to give 2 more questions out having to do with absentee ballots, because this seems to be the real crucial theme of our audience. Do you have to submit your absentee ballot into a drop box in person? Can you give your absentee ballot to another person to drop in for you in a drop box? Is it okay to travel with a group to drop off an absentee ballot? And then finally, because of US mail delays last year, many people requested absentee ballots, but then ended up voting in person and canceling that absentee ballot at their precinct. Is that option still available this year with the new laws?
Yes, you'll still be able to do that. And you can travel with a group to go vote or to a drop box. However, there are limits on who you can give your ballot to do that for you. In other words, it can only be essentially an immediate family member or your caregiver.
And I would kind of further that if somebody's doing that for you, go ahead and have them, you see the flap that we were talking about, go ahead and have them sign that they assisted you. Let's go ahead and make sure we dot all the I's and cross the T's. If you're handing this to the person who takes care of you, the person who drives you around to go put it in, go ahead and just have them sign that they assisted you. It's just one more signature, but as Colin said, we're not even checking signatures, but let's just make sure that we got everything covered so that there are no questions on the ballot. So.
Colin, anything to add to those questions?
No, I think that that these guys covered it pretty well.
Okay, I am going to throw one more out there to Ashlee. Ashlee, and to you too, Nina, what's the top concern of your organizations as non-state actors and community advocates? What's your main concern going into this November 2nd election?
I'll start, Ashlee. Our main concern is just that people understand what the changes to the law are. I mean, I'm still confused. If you have an out-of-state driver's license, and there are all sorts of situations that just make people confused. It's okay if you're registering to vote. It's okay if you're submitting your absentee ballot, but it's not okay if you're requesting an absentee ballot. That's 3 levels. Why is it okay in 2 instances and not in the middle instance? So being able to answer those questions, being able to send people to the right place, and then just not turning people off, because so much happened in 2020 that made people feel like, gee, none of this it's all a hoax, and my vote didn't count, and it was all, it wasn't handled fairly, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. That's what concerns us the most.
Yeah, and very similarly to Nina, before I answer that question, I want to correct myself. The voter protection hotline is actually run by the Lawyers Committee, not Fair Count. So forgive me for that slip up. But very similarly to Nina and League of Women Voters, voter education is really the top line, what we're really focused on, making sure voters understand, like she said, and then also making sure that people aren't overwhelmed and just say, you know what, these rules, I don't get it. This is too much. It shouldn't be this hard. I'm just not going to come out. I'm just not going to vote. So making sure that people stay engaged, making sure, like Nina said, that we understand what these new laws are. And yeah, that's really the top line, just making sure people still come out regardless of what the changes are that are made by the state, making sure that folks aren't deterred.
Okay, I'm going to take my prerogative as the moderator and ask our panelists each to answer with a simple yes or no. Should Georgia voters trust the integrity of our election system? Glynn County?
Yes.
Chatham County?
An emphatic yes.
Secretary of State's office?
Absolutely.
ACLU?
Yes.
League of Women Voters?
Absolutely.
Thank you all. Shirley, Ms. James, would you like to give some final remarks? We're at our 7:30 mark.
Well, I would like to thank everyone, especially our panelists, and also thank our listening audience for the questions. And I did have a specific question about that absentee ballot application. I don't know if there's time for me to ask it, but there was something very confusing to me. And the official application that's on the Secretary of State's office is box number 9, where it asks me, because I did fill out for an absentee ballot application, to enter my name again as I did in box 2. But then the application that is currently with the Chatham County Board of Registrars, box 9 is different. So I'm wondering which one of those applications is authentic. So please look at box 9.
So
we may have to get back to you on that.
Yeah,
I don't have both versions.
I asked this question a couple of weeks ago on our state list serve that we have. So the new application is 2 pages, right?
Yes.
And that box 9 is the very first thing on the back of the page.
Yes.
But we get people who don't have printers that duplex. They're sending us 2 pages.
Okay.
And maybe they didn't staple them together. Maybe they didn't, maybe one got pulled out of the envelope. Sometimes 2 pieces of paper don't come back and stay married to each other as they go along the process. So it's mainly just so that we can keep track of what is the information on the other side of the piece of paper in case you send it back to us as 2 pieces of paper.
Okay.
If you just put, you just put your initials there, if there's some kind of identifying information there so that we can track the other side of the paper, that name is not going to be used to rule anybody out. That's not going to be one of the areas that we're going to go, oh no, she didn't put her initial right there. So that's just basically going to be for us to keep track of it as they come in. I think the state realized that it's a 2-page application now, and that makes it complicated. Like I said, my printer that hasn't printed in 3 years definitely never duplexed. So he would have definitely gotten 2 sheets of paper. And we're actually really thankful for it, because probably half the applications we've gotten so far have been 2 pieces of paper not stapled together. So,
Okay, so that helps, because if it's the front and back, then box 9 is totally different. That's where the person who is assisting, their signature goes there. So that's why it was confusing to me.
Well, in all fairness, this application has changed. I don't know, Colin, what do you think? About 6 times in the last 2 months. So it could be that any website you go to might not have the current one. Just what we ended up just doing was making our link on our website the Secretary of State's website. So every time they change it, ours automatically changes. But before I did that, we had the same problem where people would call up and go, our application doesn't look the same. So it's just a housekeeping thing.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. But that's a confusing kind of thing, for our voters. But thank you for clarifying.
And it also is a small life lesson that trust in our local government is quite important. So in this day and age, let's all pray for more trust and more goodwill. Thank you all, our public servants and our nonpartisan organizations for being with us tonight. We appreciate your time and your enthusiasm and your willingness to help all of us have a safe and secure voting day. Audience, thank you for joining in. We will, at the Current and at the Tribune, keep on providing you with high quality information so you can become more engaged citizens of our great state of Georgia. And we wish you and your families all the best. If you'd like to tune back in, we're doing this again tomorrow night, same time. Some of the same panelists will still be here, but if you've got more questions, our apologies for not getting to them today, but there's always tomorrow. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you. Thanks.